Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt like you were being watched? That nagging sensation that something is just behind you, waiting? I always dismissed it as nothing more than my mind playing tricks, but last night I found myself questioning everything. It was late when I decided to take my usual walk. The kind of walk I do to clear my head, no destination, just moving through the night to shake off the remnants of a long, stressful day. The streets were empty, as they usually are at this hour, with only the occasional car passing in the distance. The city seemed to have fallen asleep, and the stillness wrapped around me like a blanket. I took a turn down a side street, the one that leads to the old, abandoned house on the corner. I'd walked past it countless times before, always curious about its crumbling facade but never daring to venture too close. It had been empty for as long as I could remember, a dark blotch on an otherwise quiet neighborhood. But last night, something was different. I first noticed the light. It wasn't the harsh, fluorescent glow of street lamps or the faint glow from windows in nearby houses. It was soft, almost flickering, coming from inside the house. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the streetlight or the shadows playing with my mind. But then it blinked again, just for a moment, like a signal, beckoning me toward it. I stood there for a moment, frozen. Why had I never noticed it before? Why was the house alive again? My feet moved before I could think better of it. The thought of the house being abandoned for so long had always given it a mysterious, almost unsettling presence, but the flickering light made it seem different. Alive, almost. As I drew closer, I felt the air change. The temperature seemed to drop, and a shiver ran down my spine. I tried to brush off the unease that crept into my chest, but the feeling was unmistakable. Something was wrong. The light blinked again, and I found myself standing at the front gate. The house loomed in front of me, its broken windows dark, but the faintest gleam of light coming from somewhere inside. The door was ajar, as if inviting me in. I hesitated for only a moment before I pushed the gate open, the rusted hinges creaking like a warning. It felt like a dream, surreal, but the feeling in my gut told me it was anything but. The light flickered again, this time longer, and I could hear something else, something faint, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words at first, but it seemed to call to me, like a distant voice on the wind. The chill deepened as I took a step closer to the door. And then I heard it. My name. Clear as day. The whisper was unmistakable. John. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. I hadn't told anyone I'd be out here. No one knew where I was. And yet, the voice called to me from inside the house, as if it had been waiting for me. The rational part of my mind told me to leave, to turn around and walk away, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the dark doorway. My name, spoken in a tone that sounded familiar but somehow distant, echoed in my ears. I glanced around the street, but there was no one. No cars. No lights. Just the eerie stillness of the night pressing down on me. Everything felt too quiet. I took a slow step forward, the air growing thicker with every movement. I could still hear the faint whisper, my name echoing through the silence. The light from the house flickered once more, and then everything went dark. the light disappeared. And with it, the whisper. Have you ever felt like you were being watched, but when you looked around, there was no one there? That feeling of being just a step away from something you can't quite explain, but you know deep down it's real? I've been walking these streets for years, always the same route, the same dimly lit path through the park on my way home. But that night was different. I remember the air was thick, cold in a way that made my breath visible even under the moonlight. It was one of those nights when the world feels unusually still, as if nature itself is holding its breath. I had taken my usual route, the one that led me past the old abandoned house at the corner. The house that everyone in town used to talk about. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. Nobody ever dared to go near it. Too many rumors, too many stories. Some said it was cursed, others claimed it was haunted. But to me, it was just another relic of the past, an eyesore left behind by time. Or so I thought. That night, as I passed by, something caught my eye. A flicker of light in one of the upper windows. It was faint at first, nothing more than a quick blink, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. I stood there, staring at the house, trying to make sense of what I had seen. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from the streetlights, a trick of the eye. But then the light flickered again. This time, it wasn't a reflection. It was too steady, too deliberate. I hesitated, my heart rate picking up, but curiosity got the better of me. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks, but my feet moved forward on their own. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way toward the house, each step heavy in the silence of the night. As I got closer, the light flickered once more, and then, just as I was about to turn and walk away, it went out completely. But something else followed. A sound. Soft, barely audible at first, like a whisper. It came from inside the house, and it was unmistakable. My name. It was so clear, it was as if the words were being spoken directly into my ear, but no one was there. I froze. The whisper lingered in the air, and then, again, my name. Louder this time, more distinct. I didn't move. I couldn't. The fear that gripped me was primal, the kind of fear that you can't reason with. The kind of fear that tells you to run, but your feet won't listen. For a long moment, I stood there, staring up at that dark window, my pulse hammering in my chest. The light was gone, but the whispering voice continued, faint but unmistakable. My mind screamed at me to leave, to turn around and never look back, but my body refused. Something about that voice, something about the way it called me, kept me rooted to the spot. Was I imagining this? Was it just the wind? Or was there something, or someone, inside? I didn't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by both the fear and the pull of whatever was inside that house. But then, without warning, the front door creaked open. It was faint at first, but the sound of the old hinges grinding in protest cut through the silence. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. The door swung open so slowly, it almost seemed deliberate, as if something, or someone, was taking its time to reveal itself. My heart raced. The darkness behind the door was absolute. There was no light spilling from the inside, no hint of movement. Just blackness, like the void itself had reached out to swallow the house whole. The whisper stopped, and for a brief moment, the only sound I could hear was my own breathing, shallow and ragged. I didn't know why I didn't run. I should have, but something held me there, a strange pull that I couldn't explain. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was curiosity, but my feet remained glued to the ground as I watched the door slowly inch open. A cold breeze swept from within, carrying with it a musty, decaying smell. The kind of scent you only encounter in forgotten places, places left to rot in the dark corners of the world. It was like the house itself was exhaling, releasing years of trapped air and secrets. That's when I heard it again, my name. This time, it was different. It wasn't just a whisper. It was a soft, drawn-out voice, smooth and liquid, like it was coming from someone just behind me. But when I spun around, there was nothing. Only empty street, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the ground. I turned back to the house. The door was still open, the darkness inside beckoning. "Come inside," the voice called again, a little louder this time. "We've been waiting for you." I didn't know what made me do it, but I stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the house before I could stop myself. The air inside was thick with dust and dampness. The faint outline of furniture, long abandoned, was visible in the gloom. My eyes adjusted slowly, but the house didn't reveal its secrets easily. Every corner felt like it hid something, and every creaking floorboard felt like a warning. The whispering voice seemed to come from everywhere. It was like it was woven into the fabric of the house itself. I could hear it echoing through the walls, the floor, even the air. It was maddening, that voice, as if it was inside my head, curling around my thoughts and pulling me deeper into the house. "Why did you come?" it asked, its tone shifting. "Do you not remember?" I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. There was something about that question that rattled me to the core. "Do you not remember?" I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, 1,000 questions tumbling over each other. What was this place? Who or what was calling me? And why was I standing there, listening to it? The floor beneath my feet groaned as I took another step forward. The house seemed to respond, shifting around me, almost as if it were alive. The silence between the whispers grew thicker, heavier. And then another sound. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft shuffle, like footsteps, coming from above. The house had no second floor. At least, that's what I had always assumed. But now, the sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was moving above me. Slowly. Cautiously. I held my breath. My eyes darted to the stairs that led up to the attic, dark, steep, and narrow. The air felt heavier the closer I got to them, thick with the scent of rot and decay. I could almost feel the weight of the presence above, its eyes on me, waiting. "Come closer," the voice purred from the shadows. I should have turned around. I should have left. But for some reason, I couldn't. The voice was like a drug, drawing me in, weaving its way through my thoughts, my desires, my fears. Slowly, I ascended the stairs, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, reverberating off the walls, amplifying my fear. As I reached the top, the whispering stopped. A heavy silence filled the space, and I realized just how dark it was up there. The kind of darkness that seems to pull at you, making everything feel wrong, unnatural. And then, just as I was about to turn back, a single, faint light flickered in the corner of the attic. It was small, but it was enough to illuminate the space, enough to show me what was there. And that's when I saw it. A figure. It was standing in the farthest corner of the room, cloaked in shadow, but I could make out the outline of a person. A person who seemed too still, too perfect. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, its gaze locked onto me, and then, finally, it spoke. "You should have never come," it said, its voice cold and hollow. And that's when I understood I had made a terrible mistake. I should have run. That thought echoed in my mind as I stood there, frozen, my heart racing. The door of the abandoned house creaked open, just a crack, as though something, or someone, was waiting for me on the other side. The darkness beyond that door was deep, suffocating, and I could feel it pulling me in. The whispering continued, but now it was not just my name. It was words. Soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to drift on the cold night air. I strained to hear, hoping to make sense of them, but they only grew more urgent, more desperate. And then, from somewhere deep within the house, a shadow moved. I saw it, just for a moment, something shifting behind the curtain of the open door. I couldn't tell what it was. It was like a flicker of movement, just enough to catch my eye before it disappeared into the blackness. My breath caught in my throat. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, one that coursed through my veins, a primal warning that everything in me screamed to ignore. I should have turned and walked away. But instead, my legs carried me forward. I don't know why. Maybe it was the voice that called to me, or perhaps it was something deeper. Maybe I wanted answers. I stepped onto the creaky front porch, my footfall disturbingly loud against the silence. The house groaned under the weight of time, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard the floorboards shift inside. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I was certain of one thing: I wasn't alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. There was no reply, just a relentless whispering. I stepped closer to the door, hesitating only for a second before pushing it open. The hinges screamed in protest, but it didn't matter. The door swung wide, revealing nothing but an empty hallway cloaked in darkness. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The walls seemed to close in around me as I entered, every creak and groan from the house amplifying the growing sense of unease. I took one slow, deliberate step inside, then another, each movement like a countdown. My eyes scanned the interior, trying to make out any shapes in the shadows. I saw nothing at first, just broken furniture, faded wallpaper peeling from the walls, and dust settling like a blanket over everything. But then, I saw it. A faint glow. It was coming from the end of the hallway, just beyond a cracked door that was barely hanging on its hinges. It flickered in and out like a dying light bulb, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Without thinking, I moved toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself were trying to drag me deeper into its grasp. The whispering grew louder, clearer, more distinct. I could hear my name, my full name, being repeated, the voice frantic now. I reached for the doorknob, feeling its cold, smooth surface under my fingers. The second I touched it, the whispering stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating, and in that silence, something shifted. Something breathed. I pulled the door open, not sure if I was ready for what I would find. Inside was a room bathed in dim, flickering light. The source of the light wasn't immediately clear, but it filled the room in a strange, unnatural way. And then I saw it. A mirror. It stood against the far wall, larger than any mirror I had ever seen, its frame intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The light pulsed from the glass itself, almost alive, as if it were breathing in sync with the house. And standing in the mirror was me. But not the me I knew. It was a distorted reflection, my face twisted in an expression I couldn't comprehend. My eyes stared back at me, wide with fear and something else, something that was not mine. The figure in the mirror began to move, its mouth opening slowly, as if to speak. I stepped backward, my heart pounding in my chest, but the reflection didn't stop. It came closer, its eyes still locked onto mine, its mouth opening wider as it began to whisper. "Leave, now!" The voice was not mine. It was familiar, but I couldn't place it. And that was what terrified me the most. I turned and ran. The house seemed to close in on me as I bolted for the front door, my breath ragged and my mind reeling. Every step was a battle, my legs like lead, as the whispers followed me. "Leave, now, before it's too late." I reached the door, throwing it open with all the strength I could muster. I didn't look back. Not once. I ran down the porch, into the street, and didn't stop until I was far enough away that the house was nothing more than a silhouette against the night sky. But as I looked over my shoulder, something caught my eye. The window. In the same place where the light had first flickered, I saw it again. A faint glow. And my name. Once more, the whisper echoed in the distance. "Come back." The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I turned and ran even faster. The nightmare, it seemed, had only just begun. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that mirror flashed behind my eyelids. The reflection that wasn't mine, the whisper that wasn't my voice, everything felt wrong. It was as if something had crossed a boundary, a line between reality and something else. When morning came, the sun had risen, but it offered no comfort. It was a cold light, casting long shadows through the windows, as though even the day had not fully shaken off the terror of the night. I couldn't stop thinking about the house. I tried to tell myself it was just an old, decaying building with strange reflections and broken windows, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. I had to go back. I didn't want to, but the pull was undeniable. It was like a thread tugging at my soul, pulling me back toward that forsaken house. What had I seen in that mirror? Why had I felt the urge to run, yet felt trapped in its grip at the same time? I grabbed my coat, hardly aware of what I was doing, and left my apartment. The street was empty, the usual hum of life subdued, as if even the world around me knew something was wrong. I walked in the direction of the house, the faintest sense of dread growing with every step. The closer I got, the more the air seemed to change. The wind died down, and an oppressive stillness blanketed everything. The house loomed at the end of the street, its dark outline against the gray sky. The windows, though cracked, seemed to stare back at me, watching, waiting. As I stood before it once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was alive, that it had somehow become a part of me. The whispering began again, faint at first, then growing louder, calling to me, reaching out from the shadows within. I hesitated, my hand resting on the cold doorknob. Was I making a mistake? I pushed the door open, this time without any hesitation, and stepped inside. The familiar smell of decay hit me again, the damp, musty scent of abandonment, but something else was there now, too. A sharp, metallic tang that made my stomach twist. The air felt heavier than it had the night before, thick with something unspoken. I moved cautiously through the house, the floorboards creaking underfoot, the walls seeming to pulse with a life of their own. Each step I took felt heavier, as though the house was trying to drag me deeper, pulling me into its heart. I couldn't ignore the strange sense of foreboding that had settled over me. As I approached the hallway again, I could hear it, the whispering, but now it was different. It was clearer, almost like a chant. Over and over again, My name echoed in the darkness. And then, as if it were a command, the voice growled, "Come closer." I obeyed. Against every instinct, I found myself walking toward the end of the hall, where the door to the room with the mirror stood ajar. The door, which I thought I had shut the night before, was open again, the faint glow spilling from within. The same eerie, unnatural light that had filled the room before. I reached for the door and pushed it open slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. This time, the mirror seemed different. It was no longer just a reflection, it was a portal. I stepped inside. The room was dim, save for the mirror, which now pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. It was as if the glass were breathing, the light within it shifting, bending. The symbols on the frame had grown more distinct, more defined, almost as if they were alive, twisting in subtle patterns. And then, I saw it again. The reflection of myself, but this time it was clearer. The figure in the mirror wore a twisted smile, its eyes wide and unblinking, filled with something dark. My body trembled as I realized that the reflection was no longer mirroring my every move, it was anticipating them. It knew what I was going to do before I did. "Leave," I whispered to myself, but the reflection did not stop. Instead, it reached out. Slowly, its hand extended through the glass, impossibly long fingers stretching toward me. My pulse quickened as I instinctively stepped back, but the reflection continued to reach, its hand growing closer, almost touching the surface of the glass. It felt as if the mirror was calling to me, pulling me in, tempting me to reach out and make contact. The voice was louder now, no longer just a whisper. It was a deep, guttural sound, full of malice and hunger. "You belong to us," it hissed. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, my breath shallow. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. I was entranced, caught in the mirror's grip. I had to act. In one desperate movement, I grabbed the nearest object, an old vase that sat on a nearby table, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards flying in all directions. The light from the mirror flickered violently before disappearing, and for a split second, the room was plunged into darkness. Then, silence. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart hammering in my chest. The air seemed to shift, the oppressive weight lifting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something had been awakened. And that was when I heard it, the laughter. Soft, mocking, like a breath against my ear. I spun around, but there was no one there. Only the broken remnants of the mirror lying scattered across the floor. The room was empty. Silent. But I could feel it. It was watching me. I didn't leave the house immediately. I couldn't. There was something unspoken in the air, an oppressive presence that lingered in the shadows, even though I had destroyed the mirror. The silence was unnatural. The laughter I had heard, was it real, or was my mind simply unraveling under the weight of what I had just experienced? I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the shards of the broken mirror scattered across the floor like glittering remnants of a nightmare. My hand still gripped the vase tightly, knuckles white from the force of the throw. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as I stared at the spot where the mirror had once been. Then, a sound, subtle, almost imperceptible, echoed through the house. It was a low, soft murmur, like a whisper from far away. I turned slowly, my heart racing, expecting to see something, anything, move in the corners of my vision. But there was nothing. Just the same eerie stillness that hung in the air like a heavy shroud. I felt it again. The feeling that I was not alone. That something was watching me. Instinctively, I began backing toward the door, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. My mind screamed for me to leave, to get out of this place before whatever I had unleashed could fully make itself known. But my legs felt like lead, and my steps were slow, deliberate, as if I were being pulled back by invisible strings. It wasn't until my hand touched the doorknob that I heard it again. This time, louder. A voice. Not my own. Not human. Stay. It was so clear, so unmistakable, that it sent a jolt of panic through me. The voice was not in my head. It was right there, in the room with me, resonating in the walls, in the very air. I froze, my hand still clutching the door handle, unable to move. I turned slowly, fear gripping my chest. The room was as it had been moments ago, empty, still, the broken mirror casting jagged reflections on the walls, but something was different. The air had thickened, as though the house itself was breathing. And then I saw it, a figure, standing in the doorway leading to the hall. I gasped, my heart leaping in my chest, and stumbled backward. The figure was a shadow, tall, thin, its edges flickering and shifting like smoke. Its form was indistinct, yet there was something familiar about it. I couldn't place it, but it was there, watching me. The voice came again, deeper this time, layered with an unnatural distortion. Don't leave. Not yet. I was paralyzed. My mind was screaming for me to run, but my body refused to obey. The figure took a step forward, its form flickering like a candle's flame in the wind, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, fixed on mine. Something was wrong. So wrong. It wasn't human. I could feel the chill of it creeping into my bones, the coldness seeping into my skin. It wasn't just the darkness, it was something far deeper. It was as if the very fabric of reality had torn open, and this thing was the result. I managed to tear my gaze away, only to be met by something even worse, the door. The hallway beyond it, once empty and silent, was now filled with a faint light. It was the same light I had seen in the mirror. The flickering, pulsing glow, pulling me in. The figure in the doorway didn't move, but I could sense its presence growing stronger, its voice now an echo inside my skull. Tum. And then, I heard it again. The whisper, that same voice, this time from the hallway, calling my name. John. The sound was familiar, too familiar. My mind twisted in knots, and a memory broke free, unbidden. The same voice. The same call. It was from my past, my childhood. A voice I had heard before, in the darkest corner of my room while I was young. My name. My mother's voice. But it wasn't her. I knew that now. It was something else. Something pretending to be her. And I wasn't sure how long it had been waiting, lurking in the darkness, biding its time. I had to escape. But the door wouldn't open. I twisted the knob desperately, yanking on it with all my strength, but the door was stuck, frozen in place. It wasn't just locked. It was as if something was holding it shut, something unseen, something powerful. I was trapped. The shadow in the doorway took another step forward. Closer. Closer. Its form was becoming clearer now, a twisted parody of a person, its limbs too long, its body too thin. It was no longer flickering, but solid, and its face, it was a face I had seen before, in the mirror, in the reflection that hadn't been mine. The eyes locked with mine, wide and unblinking. And then, in a voice that sent a cold shiver down my spine, it spoke again. You're ours now. I turned, my mind racing, my body screaming to move. I reached down, pulling at the broken remnants of the mirror, desperate to make something work, to create an opening, a way out. But the glass was sharp, jagged, and as I pressed my hand against it, I felt it. A cold, wet sensation spreading up my arm. I looked down. My skin was turning pale, the blood draining from my fingertips. I gasped, trying to pull away, but the mirror seemed to be pulling me in, the shards clinging to me like an insidious force. It was as if the house itself had become part of the reflection, and I was becoming part of it. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. I don't know how long I struggled. Time had stopped making sense. The pull of the mirror seemed to drain everything from me, my strength, my thoughts, my very will to fight. I could hear the sound of my own breath, shallow and panicked, but it felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. The house, the figure, the shadows, everything blurred into an overwhelming haze. I tried to scream again, but no sound came. Instead, I felt the mirror pulling harder, its cold shards digging deeper into my skin. Each movement felt like it took an eternity, the pain becoming sharper with every second. Then, just as I thought I could endure no more, the figure in the doorway spoke again. But this time, the voice was different. It was softer, almost kind, but laced with something dark. "You can't escape, John. We've been waiting for you." My name. It wasn't a name anyone else had called me in years, not in that tone, not with that certainty. The voice felt like a memory, a whisper from a place I didn't want to revisit. The more I heard it, the more familiar it became, and the more horrifying. I could feel the weight of it, the endless pull, and I understood. I understood what the figure was saying. It wasn't waiting for me to leave, it was waiting for me to accept it. The mirror, the shadow, the voice, it was all connected. It was not just the house. It was me. I had been a part of this, too, long before I ever stepped inside. The reflection, the light, the things I saw, they weren't just illusions. They were pieces of my past, pieces of something I had buried deep inside. And now, those pieces were breaking free. I felt a tug at my consciousness, pulling me closer to the shadow. My body was no longer mine to control. I was being drawn in, piece by piece, as if the house was taking me apart, unmaking me, and I couldn't fight it any longer. But just when I thought I would disappear into that darkness forever, something changed. A flicker of clarity, sharp and bright, like a light breaking through a fog. I tore my hand free from the mirror. For a moment, the world stopped moving. The cold grip released, and I stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. The figure in the doorway was no longer approaching. Instead, it stood still, watching me. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, seemed to flicker with something like amusement. "You're stronger than we thought," it murmured. "But it doesn't matter. The time is coming." The door to the hallway, which I had once seen glowing with the same ominous light, was now dark. The shadows seemed to swallow it whole, as though the house itself was shifting, closing in on me. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline rushing through my veins. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter where I turned, the walls felt like they were pressing in, narrowing the space. The whispers were louder now, overlapping one another, calling my name, calling me home. The voices were not just from the figure in the doorway, but from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from inside my head. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't escape what I had done, what I had allowed to grow in this place. I reached for the door again, but this time it opened. The hallway beyond was no longer a mere corridor. It was a vast space, stretching infinitely, filled with shadows that seemed to move, to breathe, to wait. I stepped forward, my legs shaking, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to go. I had to find a way out. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it again, that voice. "John, it's too late. You were always meant to be here." And that's when I understood. I had never left. I had never been outside. Everything, the light, the shadows, the house itself, was a prison. And I had been trapped here all along. With a shudder, I realized that it wasn't the house that had called me. It was the mirror. It was the reflection of something I had never been able to escape from. The reflection of myself. I turned around to face the door, but it was gone. The hallway stretched on, without end. There was nowhere to run anymore. And now was when the final whisper came, clear, certain, and filled with a dark finality. "You're home, John." Every morning, as soon as I step outside, I feel it, that familiar, unnerving sensation. Someone is there, behind me, walking at the same pace. I glance back quickly, but no one is ever close enough to be sure. It's always just a shadow, a presence lingering in my peripheral vision, just out of reach. The same figure, same gait. The footsteps never falter, never speed up, never slow down. They remain perfectly synchronized with mine. But the thing is, they don't belong to anyone I know. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just someone with a similar routine. But it went on for days, weeks even. Every single morning, the same footsteps. The same figure. I never saw his face, but I felt the weight of his gaze. I could feel it on my back, pressing into my skin. No words were ever exchanged, and yet something about the silence between us felt suffocating. It's a strange thing, isn't it? You can be walking through a crowd, your mind lost in the blur of the world around you, and still, the sensation of being watched is enough to make you uneasy. It doesn't matter if the person behind you never says a word, never makes a sound. You feel them there. And for some reason, that is far more unsettling than if they just approached you and spoke. I try not to let it get to me. But I can't help it. It's always the same, the sound of his steps behind me, the weight of his shadow on my every movement. When I speed up, so does he. When I slow down, he matches me. It's as if he is tethered to me, a constant companion, but one that I can never escape. I wonder if he's even aware of what he's doing, or if it's something more deliberate, a calculated act to follow me every single day. Sometimes, when I'm feeling braver, I turn around, hoping to catch him off guard. But each time, when I look over my shoulder, there's nothing. No one. Just the street behind me, empty and quiet. But when I turn back, I can still feel it. The presence is there, just out of sight. The same footsteps, the same rhythm, always following. Never too close, never too far. The silence between us starts to feel heavy. I try to keep my head down, walk faster, ignore it, but it's impossible. It's like a whisper in the back of my mind, telling me something is wrong. But what? Who is he? Why does he follow me every day? Why does he never speak? And more importantly, why don't I ever hear his footsteps while I'm not thinking about them? One morning, the usual rhythm is broken. I notice something different, a shift, a subtle change. The air feels colder, heavier. The silence between us feels thicker than usual. I glance back again, but this time I see him. Not fully, just a silhouette, a shape in the distance. He's farther back than usual, but it's him. I can feel it. I turn around quickly, my heart racing in my chest, but the street is empty. I wait for a moment, straining my ears, listening for any sound. Nothing. The world around me feels off, like the moment before a storm. And then, out of nowhere, I hear it, a faint rustle, like something shifting in the distance. It's soft at first, like the sound of leaves in the wind, but it grows louder, more distinct. A shuffle, like footsteps moving in my direction. I freeze. I can't explain it, but the air feels thick with something else now. Something I can't quite place. And that's when I see it, a phone, lying on the ground in front of me, just off the edge of the sidewalk. I hesitate before reaching for it. There's no one around. No one to claim it, no one to explain why it's there. I pick it up carefully, my fingers trembling. The screen lights up as I touch it, revealing the time and the last call received. The number, unfamiliar, flickers on the screen for just a moment before the device goes dark again. I stand there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. And that's when I hear it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. But this time, I don't look back. I can't bring myself to. Instead, I clutch the phone tightly, a cold shiver running down my spine. Something is happening. Something that's beyond my understanding. And for the first time, I feel the weight of the silence like a threat, closing in around me. What did I just pick up? What does it mean? And most terrifying of all, where did the man go? I don't know why I keep looking at the phone. Maybe I'm hoping for an explanation, some kind of clue that would make this all make sense. But there's nothing. No message. No call history, except for that one missed call from an unknown number. It's like the phone had been abandoned, left behind just for me to find. My hands are still shaking, but I can't stop myself from unlocking the screen again, as if it might somehow change. But it doesn't. The footsteps are growing louder now. It's as if they're right behind me, but I can't bring myself to turn around. I'm frozen, my breath shallow, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. My heart races, a painful thudding in my chest. The phone feels cold in my hand, an anchor to the world I don't understand anymore. I have to keep moving. I slip the phone into my pocket, my fingers brushing against it as I walk faster. The streets are still empty. The morning is just beginning, the sun's still hidden behind the clouds, and the only thing I can hear now is the pounding of my own footsteps. But those other footsteps, they're still there, trailing behind me. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed, that I'm not alone. I try to focus, to clear my mind, but the nagging presence of the footsteps never stops. It's like they're woven into the rhythm of my day now. I tell myself it's nothing, that I'm just being paranoid. After all, I'm sure I'm not the only one who hears things when they're alone, right? The mind plays tricks on you, especially when it's tired. But then, a voice in the back of my mind whispers a name, the name of the man who has been following me. I don't know how I know his name, but somehow, I do. I try to push the thought away, telling myself that I'm losing my grip on reality. I've never seen his face, never heard his voice, and yet somehow, I know his name. The same name that appears on the phone's call log, the name that doesn't belong to anyone I recognize. I try to tell myself it's nothing, but the fear is there, seeping in like a slow poison. I quicken my pace, desperate to get home, but the footsteps follow me. Each step is just a little bit closer. I'm almost running now, but I can't outrun this feeling. It's like I've become part of something bigger, something I can't control. Something is coming for me. I glance back for the first time in what feels like forever. The street is empty, but the fear is still there. I can't shake it. I turn back around and walk faster, my breath coming in short gasps. The phone in my pocket feels like it's burning through the fabric, pressing into my skin. I can feel the weight of it, the pull it has on me. And then, just as I reach the corner of my street, I hear it. A voice, soft, barely above a whisper, but unmistakable. Don't run. I stop dead in my tracks. It's not a command. It's not threatening. It's a warning. A quiet, steady voice coming from nowhere. It's as if the words themselves are woven into the very air around me. I turn slowly, my mind racing. I look around, but there's no one. No one at all. And yet, the voice. I can hear it again. Louder now. Clearer. Don't run. I feel my heart stop in my chest. The footsteps are gone. The figure is gone. There's nothing but the deafening silence of the street. I stand there, frozen, my hands trembling. The world feels like it's been hollowed out, and I am alone, stranded in the emptiness. I glance at the phone in my pocket once more. It feels heavier now, as if something inside it is shifting, waiting. I know I can't go back. I can't pretend like everything is normal. Something has changed. Something has seen me. I turn and walk home. But this time, the silence is different. It's deeper, more profound. And I can't help but feel like I'm not just walking towards my house. I'm walking towards something else. Something that I can't see, but that I know is there. Waiting. Watching. When I get home, I lock the door behind me. The familiar comfort of my apartment should bring me relief, but it doesn't. Instead, I feel trapped. The walls seem to close in, the air thick with an unspoken tension. I'm shaking, my body still reacting to the adrenaline of what just happened. I want to sit down, take a breath, but I can't. My mind races, turning over every detail, every moment from this morning. Why did I hear his voice? Where did he go? Who was he? I pull the phone out of my pocket again, my fingers brushing over the smooth surface. It feels colder now, almost like it's pulsing with a life of its own. I press the power button, but the screen stays black. I try again. Nothing. It's dead. Frustration builds inside me, but there's something more, something heavier, something darker. A feeling that I've only just begun to understand. Something about this phone, about the man, about the voice, it all feels wrong. Like it's been set in motion by something far beyond my control. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, trying to steady myself. I need to think. I need to figure out what's going on, how to make sense of this. I sit in the quiet of my apartment, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest, the feeling of eyes on me. The silence stretches, and with it, the discomfort only deepens. I try to focus on anything else. The hum of the refrigerator. The distant sound of traffic outside. But then, I hear it again. A faint sound, like footsteps. I freeze. The noise is soft at first, like a whisper, a shuffle of feet on the floor. It's so subtle, I'm not sure if I imagined it. But then it comes again, clearer now. Steady. The sound of someone walking. I stand up, my heart in my throat, and listen closely. The sound is unmistakable now. Someone is in my apartment. But I didn't hear the door open. No knock. No sign of anyone entering. I look around, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. I'm alone. I should be alone. But those footsteps, they're still there. Soft and deliberate, moving through the apartment as if they belong. I grip the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. The noise grows louder, closer. It's coming from the hallway, heading towards the bedroom. I feel my breath catch in my throat. I don't want to go there. I don't want to see what's causing it. But I have no choice. I have to know. I move slowly, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My pulse is deafening in my ears as I approach the bedroom door. The footsteps stop as I reach for the doorknob. A sudden, suffocating silence fills the space, like the entire apartment is holding its breath. I hesitate, my hand trembling. Then, without thinking, I throw the door open. There's nothing. No one. The room is empty, just as I left it. But the window is open. I don't remember opening it. I swear I didn't. I walk over to it, my steps hesitant, and peek outside. The street below is quiet, just like always. Nothing unusual. But then I hear it again, the sound of the footsteps. But now, they're not coming from inside the apartment. They're coming from behind me. I whip around, my heart leaping into my throat. But there's nothing. No one. The room is as empty as it was before. This can't be happening. I back out of the room, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. I want to leave. I want to get out, but the thought of stepping outside makes my blood run cold. The figure, the footsteps, the voice, it's all too much. And that phone, the phone that somehow knew me, that somehow knew where I'd be. I sit down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. The silence around me is deafening now. It feels like the walls are closing in again, pressing tighter and tighter. I can't escape it. The sense of being watched, of being followed, it's suffocating. I pick up the phone again, willing it to give me some answer, some explanation. But the screen remains black. Just as it should have been, just as it was when I first picked it up. And then, in the silence, I hear it. A soft vibration. Coming from the phone. I look at it, my pulse quickening. The screen flickers to life, and the same unknown number appears. Before I can react, the phone starts ringing. The same number. The call is incoming. My breath catches in my throat as I stare at the screen, unable to move. The voice I heard before is there, echoing in my mind. Don't answer. But the phone keeps ringing, and I know I can't stop it. I press the button, and the world goes silent. The moment I press the button, I feel it. The air around me shifts, like a sudden change in pressure. I hold the phone to my ear, the faint buzzing on the other end sending chills through my body. For a moment, there's nothing, just static, like the phone is still trying to find a signal. But then, slowly, a voice crackles through, low and distant. Are you ready? The words are slow, deliberate, almost too calm for what they imply. The voice sounds familiar, though I can't place it. It doesn't sound like the voice I heard earlier, but there's something about it, something hauntingly cold that makes my blood run cold. I open my mouth to speak, but my throat is tight, the words stuck. I try to swallow, to shake off the fear creeping up my spine, but it's impossible. I can't think. The only thing I can hear is the steady breathing on the other end of the line, like the person is just waiting for me to respond. I force out a single word. Who? The silence stretches, but then the voice comes again, slow and measured. You know who I am. I don't know who this is. My mind races, desperately searching for some connection, some clue to explain what's happening. But nothing comes. I try to steady myself, clutching the phone tighter, my palms sweaty. My chest feels tight, as if the walls of the apartment are pressing in on me from all sides. Why? Why are you following me? My voice cracks as the words leave my mouth. It feels almost too real now, too tangible. This thing on the other end of the line, it knows something. The voice responds, and this time, it's colder. I'm not following you. I'm waiting for you. The words don't make sense. Waiting for me? I repeat, my mind spinning. What do you mean? Another pause. I can hear the rustle of breath on the line. The game has already started. You should have known better than to run. I feel a knot form in my stomach, cold dread creeping up my spine. The phone feels heavier in my hand. I want to hang up. I want to end the call, to silence that voice before it drives me insane. But I can't move. My body is frozen, locked in place by fear. I don't know what this is, but I feel it deep down. I know it's not just a random prank. This is something else. Where are you? I finally manage to ask, the words coming out of my mouth before I can stop them. The voice chuckles softly, the sound a strange, hollow thing. I'm closer than you think. The call abruptly ends, leaving me in complete silence once again. I stand there, staring at the phone in disbelief. My mind races, trying to piece together the fragments of what just happened. The game? Waiting for me? What did it all mean? I don't know how long I stand there, my eyes locked on the phone. Time feels strange, suspended. I want to throw it across the room, to destroy it, but a part of me knows I can't. The phone is the key to understanding this, whatever this is. But then something catches my attention. A sound coming from the hallway. Footsteps. The soft, steady rhythm that I've grown so used to, but now it's louder. Closer. It's not just in my mind. I can hear them unmistakably. I don't move. I stand frozen in place, holding my breath, listening. The steps grow nearer, coming down the hallway. They sound just like they always have, like someone walking in time with me. But this time, it's not a shadow. It's not just a presence. I hear the creak of the floorboards, the sound of someone inside my apartment. I back away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. My eyes dart around the room, searching for something, anything, to defend myself with. But there's nothing. Only the slow, measured footsteps growing closer. I edge toward the door, my mind racing. I don't know what I expect to find when I open it. I don't know what's out there. But I can't stay here. Not with this presence creeping up behind me. I reach for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I turn it. But before I can open it, the footsteps stop. Completely. The silence is deafening. The world feels like it's holding its breath. My heart races, and for a moment, I wonder if I'm imagining it all. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks, the stress, the fear. But then, I hear it. A soft knock on the door. Not the sound of a hand, but something else. Something lighter. Like a tap, 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 too deliberate, too methodical. It's the kind of knock you hear when someone knows exactly what they're doing. I don't want to open the door. I don't want to face whatever's on the other side. But a part of me knows I have to. There's no escape. Not anymore. I take a deep breath, steeling myself, and slowly turn the knob. The door creaks open, and I'm face to face with nothing. An empty hallway stretches out in front of me, just like every other day. The silence is overwhelming, pressing in from all sides. But I know what's behind me. I can feel it. The presence that has been following me is right there, just beyond the door, waiting for me to turn around. I don't turn around. But the footsteps start again. Closer than ever before. I stand there, frozen, my hands still gripping the doorknob. My heart is hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The footsteps are so close now, I can feel the air shift with each step. But still, I don't turn around. I can't. Every instinct in my body tells me that if I do, whatever is behind me will see me. And I don't know if I'm ready to face it. The footsteps stop. Just like that. The silence that follows is suffocating, almost unbearable. For a moment, I think maybe I imagined it, maybe I've gone mad. But then, the voice comes again. It's soft, barely a whisper, but it's there. Turn around. I can't move. My body won't obey me. The fear is paralyzing, crawling under my skin like insects. My eyes remain locked on the empty hallway in front of me, trying desperately to ignore the cold weight of the presence behind me. And then, the phone in my pocket vibrates again. I jump, my heart nearly stopping in my chest. I pull it out, my hands trembling so much I almost drop it. The screen flickers to life, showing the same unknown number, flashing like a warning. The voice is in my head again, this time louder, clearer. Answer it. I don't know why, but I do. I press the button, bringing the phone to my ear. The line crackles, and for a moment, there's nothing, just static. And then, the voice. It's not a voice I recognize. It's calm, almost soothing, but there's something in it that makes my skin crawl. You're almost there. You're almost ready. I try to speak, but my voice is lost. My throat feels tight, as though I'm choking on the very air I breathe. Ready for what? I manage to croak out. My voice is a hoarse whisper, barely audible. The answer comes slowly, each word weighted with meaning, each syllable a drop of dread falling into the silence. To see. I don't understand what it means. To see? See what? See who? And then, I hear it. A sound I didn't expect. The creak of the floor behind me, too loud, too close. It's not the footsteps. This time, it's different. This time, it's the sound of someone breathing. I turn, but nothing is there. The hallway is empty, just as it should be. But the air is thick, like something is hanging just out of sight, like there's something on the edge of my vision just waiting to reveal itself. I can't see it, but I can feel it. The phone falls from my hand, clattering to the floor. I don't even notice. I don't notice anything except the suffocating presence that fills the room. The space around me seems to contract, the walls leaning in, closing me off, until there's nothing left but the sound of my own breathing and that other breath, too slow and steady, almost too close to be real. I try to speak, to shout, to do anything to break the hold this thing has on me. But no words come out. I can't move, can't breathe, can't escape the feeling that something is staring at me, waiting for me to make the first move. And then, suddenly, the world goes dark. It's not like the lights flickered or went out. It's as if the very air itself has turned to blackness, swallowing up everything. I can't see my hands, my body. The room is gone. The hallway is gone. There's nothing but darkness and the sound of my own heart loud in my ears. I feel it then. Cold fingers brushing my shoulder. They're real. I can feel them. They press gently into my skin, as if testing, as if making sure I'm still there. A voice in the darkness, barely above a whisper. You should have run. The words hit me like a slap, and I finally find the strength to move. I stumble backward, but there's nowhere to go. The darkness stretches on forever, closing in. I feel my body move, but it's like I'm floating, like I'm not really in control anymore. The cold fingers grip me tighter, and I hear the voice again, closer this time. You've been running your whole life. I can't breathe. My chest feels tight. I can't see. I can't feel the ground beneath me. There's nothing left but the pressure, the suffocating darkness, and the sense that something is coming for me, coming to claim me. And then I hear it. The footsteps echoing in the dark. But they're not my footsteps. They're someone else's. Someone else is following me now. I open my mouth to scream, but no sound comes out. I try to move, but my legs are frozen in place. I can't escape. I can't see. I can't breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the darkness pulls away. The room comes back into view. The apartment is empty. The hallway is quiet. The fear is still there, but the presence is gone. The weight is lifted. But I know it's not over. Not yet. I look around, my body trembling, but there's no sign of the man, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. The silence is deafening. The apartment looks the same as it always has. But it feels different. The walls are no longer just walls. They're watching me. And I know, deep down, that I'm not alone. Not anymore. The phone lies on the floor, cracked, the screen still dark. But as I stare at it, I know that it's not over. Not yet. And I don't think it ever will be. Have you ever been woken up in the dead of night, only to find yourself alone in the silence of your house, wondering if the world outside is still as it should be? I have. And the worst part? I was certain that I heard a doorbell. At first, it was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind, a sound that didn't quite make sense. The doorbell, at this hour? But then, there it was again, louder this time, unmistakable, echoing through the stillness of the night. I pulled the blanket over my head, my heart racing in my chest. It was late. Way too late for anyone to be at the door. I had just moved into the small house a few weeks ago. The kind of house that feels isolated, far enough from the city to be quiet but close enough to hear the sounds of life every so often. It had always felt like a safe place, peaceful, calm. But tonight was different. The doorbell rang again. I sat up quickly, my body frozen in place. My head spun, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it was a neighbor, lost in thought, pressing the button by accident. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was something off about the sound. Something wrong. I slid out of bed, my feet cold against the floor. I padded quietly down the hallway, the old wood creaking under my weight. Each step felt heavy, like the house itself was trying to hold me back. The lights flickered as I passed them, making my skin crawl. It was as if the darkness in the corners of the house were reaching out, pulling at me. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite explain. My mind raced. Was it a prank? Or was there someone out there? I pulled back the curtains slightly, peeking through the window. The porch was empty. There was no one standing there, no shadow of a figure lingering in the darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. A gust of wind blew through the cracks in the window, and I flinched, my breath catching in my throat. But when I looked down, there, resting on the doormat, was something I hadn't seen before. A drawing. A child's drawing, crudely sketched with thick, dark crayon. It showed a simple picture of a house, my house. The lines were jagged, uneven, but it was unmistakable. The windows, the door, the roof. Everything was there. But what sent a shiver down my spine was the figure. A dark, distorted silhouette standing just outside the window in the drawing, its features unclear, its form impossible to define. It was like a shadow, a presence, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the drawing. I didn't know what to make of it. Who had left this? And why? A cold chill ran down my spine as I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned quickly, my eyes scanning the room behind me. But there was nothing there. Only the quiet stillness of the house. The doorbell rang again. This time, the sound was louder, more insistent. It seemed to reverberate through the walls, shaking the house to its core. I jumped back, my heart racing. The cold air in the hallway felt like it was closing in around me, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. I slowly reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. Every instinct told me to just ignore it, to go back to bed and forget this ever happened. But the image of that drawing, the dark figure in the window, wouldn't leave my mind. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The porch was empty. No one was there. The night air was cold and still, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the distance. But the drawing, it was gone. I glanced around quickly, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The world outside was silent, as if holding its breath. I stepped back inside, the door creaking as I closed it behind me. As I turned to walk down the hallway, I noticed something else. A faint whisper, just beyond my hearing. A rustling sound, like paper being shifted. It came from the living room. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. There was no one there. I had checked the entire house when I first moved in. The rooms were empty. I moved toward the sound, cautiously stepping forward, the air growing colder with every step. The whisper grew louder, and then I saw it. A new drawing. It was on the living room table, placed neatly in the center. This one was even clearer than the last, but the figure was different. It was taller, more defined, standing at the window, watching. This time, the face was visible, but it was wrong. The eyes were hollow, the mouth twisted into a smile that didn't belong in any world. I took a step back, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. I couldn't understand what was happening. How had this drawing appeared here? Who had left it? I turned, panic surging through me. I needed to get out, to leave this place. But the door, I had just closed it. The doorbell rang again. I spun around, my heart racing. This time, I didn't hesitate. I had to know what was going on. I had to see who or what was behind this. But when I opened the door again, there was nothing. Only the darkness. And the drawing. I slammed the door shut again, the heavy thud of it echoing through the hallway. My hands were still shaking, my mind reeling from what I had just seen. The drawing. The figure in the window. It was all too much. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But there it was, that sickening feeling of something watching me, just out of sight, always just beyond my reach. And I couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, had been in my house. The silence that followed the doorbell felt suffocating. The air was thick, heavy with an unspoken tension. I could still hear the faint rustling from the living room, like paper being shuffled, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the sound that unsettled me, it was the absence of any other noise. The house had gone completely still, as though it were holding its breath. I slowly made my way back to the living room, my feet light on the wooden floor. The light from the hallway barely reached this far, casting long shadows across the room. I scanned the room quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. The table was empty. No new drawing. No strange figure lurking in the corners. But something had changed. I stepped forward cautiously, and as I did, I noticed it, a small movement in the corner of my eye. The curtains by the window had shifted, just slightly. A breeze? No, the air was still. Something had touched them. Something had been there. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned to face the window. The curtains swayed gently, though there was no breeze. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. I reached for the curtain, my fingers brushing against the fabric. It felt cold, unnatural, as though the air behind it had been frozen. With a deep breath, I pulled it back. Nothing. There was nothing outside. Just the empty street, dark and silent. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It was the same as before, the eerie sensation that something had been there, something just out of view. My eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for any clue, any sign that might explain the strange happenings. Then, I saw it. A figure, small but distinct, standing in the distance, near the sidewalk. It was barely visible in the shadows, just a silhouette, but I could see the outline clearly, the figure of a child. My breath froze in my chest. The child wasn't moving. They were simply standing there, staring. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but the figure remained distant, obscured by the dark. Was it real? Had it been there all along? I didn't know, but the dread that gripped me was all-consuming. I couldn't tear my eyes away, the figure seeming to grow larger in my vision the longer I stared. Something was off. I knew it, deep down. The doorbell rang again. This time, the sound was not just a ring. It was louder, more insistent, like a demand. It echoed in my ears, vibrating through the walls. I staggered back, the sudden noise overwhelming me. My body moved on instinct, but my mind was screaming at me to stop, to just leave. But my feet wouldn't listen. I opened the door. This time, I had to know what was out there. The porch was empty. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in shallow gasps, the world around me silent. The darkness pressed in closer, heavy and thick. There was no child, no figure on the sidewalk. Nothing. I stepped out onto the porch, my heart racing, eyes darting to every corner of the yard, every shadow in the night. The street was still, deserted. There were no signs of movement. But then, something caught my eye, a small piece of paper crumpled up on the ground near the edge of the porch. I bent down, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was a drawing. The same crayon marks. The same jagged lines. But this one was different. It showed my house, just like the others, but there was something new in the drawing. A dark shape by the window. A shape that wasn't there before. I turned the drawing over. Written on the back, in the same childish scrawl, were 3 words, "You can't hide." I stumbled back, my heart pounding, panic flooding my veins. The chill in the air deepened, and I could feel the presence again. The watching. The waiting. I quickly stepped back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breath, trying to convince myself that none of this was real, that I was just imagining things. But I knew I wasn't. The feeling, the terror that had settled into the pit of my stomach, was unmistakable. I wasn't alone. And someone, or something, was watching me. The house felt smaller now, as though the walls were closing in on me. The quiet seemed wrong, unnatural. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the air sent my nerves into overdrive. I turned to leave the hallway, to find some comfort in the kitchen, maybe even make a cup of tea to calm my nerves. But as I moved, I saw it. A shadow, just out of the corner of my eye. It was standing in the hallway. A dark figure, tall and thin, just like the one in the drawings. But this time, it wasn't a drawing. It was real. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me with empty eyes. The air around it seemed to distort, bending unnaturally. The house, the world, everything felt warped, like I wasn't in control anymore. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare, my mind unable to comprehend what I was seeing. And then, in a whisper, a voice broke the silence. "You can't hide." The words were so familiar, so chilling. And as the figure took a slow step forward, I realized, in that moment, the truth. It was never about hiding. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the voice echoing in my head like a terrifying mantra. "You can't hide." The figure took another step forward, its presence growing more oppressive, more suffocating with every inch it closed. The air around me felt thick, like a weight pressing against my chest. I tried to speak, to move, but my body refused to obey. The fear that had paralyzed me earlier seemed to intensify, spiraling into something darker, more primal. The figure didn't make a sound as it drew closer. its silhouette blurred, its edges twisting in the dim light of the hallway. But its eyes were so clear, so empty, they seemed to see straight through me, into the very core of my being. I didn't understand. I couldn't. The figure came closer, its steps slow but deliberate, as though it knew I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream, to run, but every movement felt like it would draw it closer. The walls of the house seemed to press in, narrowing the space until there was nowhere to go. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure stopped. It was right in front of me now, so close I could feel its cold, unnatural presence. My breath caught in my throat, and I fought to swallow, but my mouth had gone dry. The figure raised one hand, long, spindly fingers reaching for me, as though beckoning me into the darkness. I closed my eyes, my body shaking uncontrollably. My mind screamed for me to wake up, to find some escape from the nightmare. But when I opened my eyes again, I was still there, still trapped in the suffocating grasp of whatever this thing was. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it reached out, its fingers brushing against my cheek. The touch was icy, like ice itself, sending a shock of cold through my skin. I flinched back, my heart racing. And then, I felt it. A sensation, not physical, but psychological, like 1,000 eyes boring into my mind, forcing their way in, pulling out my deepest fears. It was as though it was probing my thoughts, seeking the darkness inside me. The fear, the regret, the guilt. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air, unspoken, but I could feel it all the same. And then, the figure seemed to lean in, as if whispering something directly into my ear. "You're not alone." The words sent a jolt through me, and I staggered backward, my legs finally giving out beneath me. I collapsed to the floor, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. My breath came in ragged gasps, the room spinning around me. I was losing control. My sense of reality, of safety, of everything I had once known, it was slipping away, unraveling with each passing second. The fear wrapped itself around me like a vice, squeezing tighter and tighter. But then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty. The shadows returned to their usual shape, the air thick but no longer suffocating. I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a hallucination? A trick of the mind brought on by stress? Or had I really seen it? I pulled myself to my feet, my body still trembling. The silence around me was deafening, but the fear, the feeling that something was watching me, hadn't faded. If anything, it was stronger than before, like a presence that had settled into the very bones of the house. I turned back toward the living room, where the drawings had appeared. My eyes darted to the table, but there was nothing there. The place was empty. Quiet. For a moment, I considered running. Just leaving the house, fleeing to anywhere that felt safe. But I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't help. Whatever was happening, whatever force was behind these drawings, behind the voice and the figure, it wasn't something I could outrun. I had to face it. I had to understand what was going on before it consumed me entirely. I walked into the living room, my every step heavy with dread. I glanced at the door, which I had left open earlier, and felt the familiar shiver of unease crawl up my spine. The doorbell still hadn't stopped ringing in my ears. The drawing from earlier, the one with the dark figure at the window, lingered in my mind, haunting me with its impossible simplicity. I moved toward the window. The street outside was empty. No child, no figure standing by the sidewalk. Just the same empty road, bathed in the faint glow of the streetlights. But then, as I stared into the night, I saw something, a faint outline in the distance. Something moving. No, someone moving. I froze. It was a figure. A shadow, but this time I could make out more details. It wasn't a child this time. It was an adult, tall, thin, and moving slowly toward my house. I wanted to run. I wanted to lock the doors and hide, but I couldn't tear myself away from the window. The figure kept coming closer, and as it did, the feeling of dread settled over me once again. It was the same feeling, the same presence. And I knew with every fiber of my being that this wasn't just some random passerby. This was it. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was different. This time it wasn't just a ring. It was a knock. A knock on the door. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. I knew what would happen next. The figure was here, at my door, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. And then, a voice. "Let me in." The words were cold, hollow, like they came from somewhere deep in the shadows. They weren't just asking to come in. They were demanding it. And I had no choice but to answer. I slowly walked toward the door, my legs shaking beneath me, my mind screaming for me to turn back. But there was no turning back now. I reached for the door handle, and I opened it. The door swung open, and there it was. The figure stood just outside, cloaked in shadow. Its shape was indistinct, yet somehow familiar. It was tall, unnaturally so, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire doorway, like it belonged to a place I couldn't see. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt its eyes on me, cold, knowing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam the door shut and lock myself away. But my body wouldn't respond. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move as the figure shifted, its form twitching in a way that wasn't quite human. The air outside was unnaturally still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The street was empty, and the streetlights flickered like dying stars. I could hear nothing, not even the usual hum of distant cars or the rustling of leaves in the trees. The figure didn't speak at first. It simply stood there, silent, watching me. I felt an overwhelming urge to step back, to retreat into the safety of my house, but my feet refused to move. Then, in a voice that sent chills down my spine, it whispered, "You invited me in." I couldn't breathe. My mouth went dry, and I could feel the sweat on my palms, slick and cold. The drawing, the one I had found earlier, flashed in my mind. The dark shape by the window. The words that followed, "You can't hide." I had opened the door. I had allowed this thing into my home. The figure took a slow step forward, and though I didn't move, it felt as though the space between us shrank. It was close now, too close, and I could feel its cold, oppressive presence. Every breath I took felt shallow, like the air had been replaced by something heavy, something wrong. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to croak, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer at first. It simply raised its hand, long, spindly fingers stretching toward me, each one impossibly thin, almost skeletal. The movement was slow, deliberate, as though it knew exactly what it was doing. It reached for my face, its fingers brushing against my cheek. It was cold. Too cold. The touch sent a jolt of panic through my body, and for a moment, I couldn't move at all. The figure's fingers lingered there, pressing lightly against my skin, as if feeling for something deep within me. And then, with a sudden, sharp motion, the figure yanked its hand back. The air shifted. A cold gust of wind swept through the doorway, and the temperature dropped instantly. I felt it, like ice crawling up my spine, numbing my senses. The world outside seemed to blur, the shadows stretching unnaturally, twisting in ways that couldn't be explained. I opened my mouth to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I tried to step back, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The figure moved again, its body swaying like it was floating, drifting into the house without a sound. It didn't step forward. It just was there, like it had always been. The space between us seemed to vanish entirely, and I was left standing in its presence, helpless. It whispered again, the words so soft they barely reached my ears. "You can't escape me." The room felt smaller, suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, and the once familiar space around me began to warp, to twist in on itself. It was like being trapped in a dream, where nothing was as it seemed, where the rules of reality no longer applied. I turned, instinctively, toward the hallway. But before I could take a step, the figure was there. It was everywhere. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere to go. The figure raised its hand again, and I felt something shift in the air. A sudden pressure, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, the words came again, louder this time. "You are mine." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. It was pulling me toward it, drawing me in, like gravity itself had changed. I could feel the darkness closing around me, inch by inch, until it felt as though the house itself was collapsing, folding in on itself. My thoughts scattered. Panic surged in my veins. Get out. But where? There was no escape. The house had become a prison, a trap I couldn't break free from. The figure leaned in closer, its face still hidden in shadow. I could hear its breath now, cold, rasping. And then, in a voice that felt like it came from deep within my soul, it whispered again. "You shouldn't have opened the door." I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think, couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but the figure's presence held me captive. My entire body felt frozen, unable to escape its grasp. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the pressure lifted. The air cleared, and I could breathe again, though every breath felt shallow and ragged. I looked around in confusion. The figure was gone. The house, though dark and silent, was normal again. The hallway stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet. The oppressive weight of its presence had lifted. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to move. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare? Or had it been real? The doorbell rang again. This time, the sound wasn't loud or frantic. It was soft, insistent. I turned toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed for me to run, to lock the door, to never open it again. But I knew, deep down, that it was already too late. I had opened the door once. And now, there was no going back. The doorbell rang again, louder this time. I walked slowly toward the door, my legs unsteady, my hands shaking. I reached for the handle, and as I pulled it open, the darkness outside seemed to swallow me whole. The moment the door swung open, I felt an overwhelming rush of cold air, colder than anything I had ever felt before. It seeped into my skin, freezing me to the core. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, louder than the silence that surrounded me. There, standing in the threshold, was the figure. This time, it was different. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just a presence. It was something tangible, its form more defined, more real, though still no more human. It loomed before me, the edges of its body flickering, shifting like a poorly drawn sketch on an old canvas. Its face, though still hidden in darkness, felt closer. The eyes, those endless black voids, seemed to peer into my very soul, dissecting every thought, every feeling. I wanted to shut the door. I wanted to flee, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. My body refused to obey. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it slowly raised its hand, the fingers long and unnaturally thin, almost like they were reaching for something far beyond me. My chest tightened, as though something was constricting around my heart. I knew, without a doubt, that if it touched me again, there would be no coming back. Its hand hovered in the air, the coldness spreading from its fingers, touching the edges of the doorframe. The temperature continued to drop, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The walls of the house groaned, as if the very structure itself was protesting this unnatural presence. Then, it did something I hadn't expected. It stepped forward, crossing the threshold, entering my home without so much as a sound. It didn't stumble. It didn't hesitate. It just was, as if it had always been there, waiting for the perfect moment to step into my world. My vision blurred, the edges of the room warping and bending as the figure's presence filled every inch of space. My throat was tight, and I couldn't force a word out. I couldn't look away from its eyes, though I didn't want to see them. I could feel something pulling at my mind, something insistent and dark. The longer I stared, the more I felt my grip on reality slipping away. And then, the figure spoke. You can't outrun what's already inside. Its voice was deep, resonating through my bones, sending a wave of nausea through me. The words didn't just echo through the room, they seemed to press on my chest, like invisible hands clutching my ribs. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor, the world spinning around me. But the figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching, waiting. And then, a sudden realization gripped me. This wasn't just about the figure. This was about me. I had brought it in. I had let it in when I opened that door for the first time, when I allowed the drawing to appear on the doormat. I thought about the strange drawings that had appeared over the past few days. The pictures of my house. The messages. The warning in the darkness. All of it was connected. This was no random force, no fleeting nightmare. This was something that had been watching me, pulling the strings, guiding me to this moment. And now, it was here. You think you can escape? The figure hissed, its voice a low, rasping whisper. You think you can fight me? I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I tried to rise, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was trapped, physically, mentally, spiritually. It was like being locked in a cage I couldn't see, surrounded by walls made of fear and doubt. The figure stepped closer, its presence filling every inch of the room. I could feel the cold seeping deeper into my bones, spreading like a disease. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, of hiding. But I knew it was too late. There was no running. There was no safety. The figure tilted its head slightly, its gaze piercing through me, and in that moment, I felt as if I was being stripped bare, my most intimate thoughts laid bare for it to see. "Do you know who I am?" the figure asked. Its voice was now a soft, guttural murmur, almost like it was savoring every word. "I am what you've always feared. I am the thing that lurks in the corners of your mind. The darkness you try to ignore. The shadow you can't escape." The walls seemed to close in even tighter. The house had become a living thing, a dark and suffocating entity that was closing around me, trapping me inside with this thing. My body ached, my chest tight with fear, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the figure. I couldn't escape the reality of what it was telling me. "You were never alone," the figure continued. "I've been with you since the beginning. Every whisper in the dark. Every flicker in the corner of your eye. Every nightmare that left you cold and trembling. That was me." I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. No. This couldn't be true. It couldn't be real. But the figure's words were like knives, cutting through the thin veneer of reality I had been clinging to. "You opened the door," it said softly, almost tenderly. "And now, you're mine." Suddenly, the figure lunged. Its hand shot out, and I felt its cold fingers close around my wrist. It was as though its touch was draining the life from me, its coldness seeping deeper into my skin. I tried to pull away, but the grip was unyielding. It was too strong. The room spun faster, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The walls were no longer solid. They wavered, bending and stretching as if the house itself was alive, breathing with the figure. I gasped for air, but it was no use. The pressure was too much. The fear, the cold, the suffocating weight of it all was crushing me. And then, just as quickly as it had all started, the figure's grip loosened. The pressure lifted. The walls stopped closing in. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my chest heaving. The figure was gone. The room was still. Silent. Empty. For a moment, I thought I might be dreaming. Maybe it was all in my head. But the cold in my bones, the suffocating presence that had filled the house, it was real. And as I lay there on the floor, I knew one thing for certain: I would never be free of it. The doorbell rang again. But this time, I didn't have the strength to open it. It would ring forever. And I would listen. Forever. It started with a simple notification. It was late, almost midnight, when I picked up my phone to check the new photos in my gallery. Nothing unusual, just a few random images from family get-togethers, snapshots from a friend's wedding, the usual. But then, something caught my eye. A new photo appeared. I hadn't taken it. No one had sent it. It was just there, as if it had always been there, waiting to be found. The image showed a quiet, picturesque street, the kind you see in movies. A cobbled road with old, weathered houses lining both sides. The kind of place that feels peaceful, almost frozen in time. But there was something strange about the photo. Something unsettling. It was a place I'd never been. The details were sharp, the colors vivid, like a memory, only it wasn't mine. I didn't recognize the street, nor the houses. But there was something about it, something in the background, that felt oddly familiar. A dark figure, barely visible, standing at the edge of the road. It was just a silhouette, but its presence made my skin crawl. I shook it off. It was probably just a mistake, some glitch in the cloud storage, a random image that had accidentally synced to my phone. I swiped to the next photo, trying to move past the odd feeling creeping over me. But then I saw another image. A different one, yet just as disturbing. This time, it was a photo of a park. The trees were thick, casting long shadows across the path. It was the middle of the day, but the lighting in the photo felt off. The shadows seemed too dark, the atmosphere too heavy for the time of day. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of the details. And then it hit me. The park was familiar. It was the park Maya used to take me to when I was a child. I hadn't been there in years, not since she passed away. But the photo was taken recently. I could tell by the leaves on the ground, the modern bench near the fountain. But I hadn't been there. Not in ages. I felt my pulse quicken. I swiped to the next photo, hoping it would be different. But no, another photo appeared. This one was of a house. A house I didn't recognize at first, but as I stared at it, the details began to click. It was my cousin's house. I had visited it only once, when I was much younger, but I remembered the dark brick, the garden in the front, the large windows. I hadn't been there in years, not since he had moved away. I stared at the photo, my fingers trembling on the screen. It wasn't just a house in the photo, it was a scene from inside. Through one of the windows, I could make out the silhouette of someone sitting in a chair. The figure wasn't moving. It was just there, staring out into the yard. I couldn't tell who it was. The figure was blurred, its outline distorted, as if it wasn't quite solid. But the worst part was the caption. There was none. No date. No name. Just a photo. It felt as though the phone had no idea where it had come from, no context for the image. And then, as if to confirm my growing sense of unease, I saw something else. In the corner of the screen, another notification appeared, new photo received. I didn't recognize the number. I didn't recognize the name. I clicked it open anyway. The photo was of my childhood home. A place I hadn't thought about in years. It was a photo from outside, the front yard lit up by the soft glow of the streetlight. The windows were dark, and the front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just left or was about to enter. The grass was overgrown, and the shadows stretched long across the driveway. But that wasn't the part that chilled me. The chilling part was the small figure standing just at the edge of the driveway, obscured by the shadows. It was too far to see clearly, but I could tell it was standing still, unmoving. A small child, perhaps? Or something else entirely? I opened the photo more, zooming in, but all I could see were the edges of the figure's form, too blurry to distinguish anything. I quickly turned off my phone, hoping the photos would disappear if I just ignored them. But as I lay in bed, my mind raced. What was happening? How could these photos be appearing? Why were they tied to places I had never visited, to family members I hadn't seen in years? The connection was too precise to be random. And as I lay there in the dark, staring at the dark ceiling, I felt an icy chill run down my spine. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain: the next photo was coming. And I had no idea what it would show. I didn't sleep that night. The photos had left me unsettled, gnawing at my mind like a persistent itch I couldn't reach. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing in the driveway of my childhood home, its blurry outline growing sharper in my memory. I could almost feel its gaze, though I couldn't tell if it was watching me or something else. The next morning, I told myself it was all in my head. a trick of the mind. Maybe the photos were just a strange coincidence, a glitch in the system. I tried to go about my day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the next image to appear. And then, just as I suspected, it came. The notification flashed again, new photo received. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help myself. I opened it. This time, the photo was of a dark hallway. The angle was strange, like it had been taken from behind a door. I could barely make out the details, but I recognized it instantly. It was my aunt's house, the one she had lived in before she passed. The one that had always felt too empty after she was gone. I zoomed in, trying to focus on the shadows, the small details. And there it was again. A figure. This time, it wasn't blurred. It was clear, standing in the hallway, just at the end, looking directly at the camera. It was a woman. I couldn't tell who she was. Her face was shadowed, but her posture was familiar, almost comforting. But then, a realization struck me. The figure couldn't have been taken recently. The wallpaper in the hallway was old, out of style. It had been replaced when the house was sold. No one had been in that house for years. I quickly closed the photo and stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The connection was undeniable now. These images weren't just random. They weren't glitches. Someone, or something, was sending them to me. And they were tied to people I knew. People I had lost. A voice inside my head told me to stop looking, to delete everything, to forget about it. But I couldn't. I needed to know what this was. I needed to understand why this was happening. I went back to my gallery, scrolling through the photos again. Each one was more disturbing than the last, places I didn't recognize, but that felt connected to people I had known. My cousin's house. My aunt's park. My childhood home. All of them were different, but all of them had one thing in common: I hadn't been there in years. And none of the photos were recent. I tried to focus, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was some sort of prank? But who would go through the trouble of hacking into my phone, sending these specific photos? It didn't make sense. Then, another notification came. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with the all-too-familiar words, "New photo received." This time, I was more hesitant. But my curiosity won over my fear. I opened the message. The photo was of my own apartment, taken from the street outside. It was night, and the lights in my windows were dimly lit. The door was closed, but in the window, I could make out the faint outline of a figure standing just inside. It wasn't moving, just standing there, staring out. I squinted, trying to make out more details. The figure didn't look familiar, but the more I stared, the more I began to feel that unsettling familiarity again. Like I should know them. I should recognize that posture, that stillness. The strangest part? I was sure I was the only one inside my apartment at that moment. I had been home alone all evening. There was no one else. I quickly looked through my apartment's windows to confirm. But the blinds were drawn, and the apartment was dark, except for the soft glow of the lamp by the couch. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I checked the time on my phone. It was just past 9. That photo had been taken recently. I knew it. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck as I stared at the screen. The photo of my apartment didn't just show the outside, it was as though the figure inside had been waiting for me to see it. Waiting for me to react. I slammed the phone down on the table, pushing it away from me. My hands shook uncontrollably. I needed to do something. I couldn't sit here and let this continue. But before I could even stand up, the phone buzzed again. I froze. My mind screamed at me to ignore it, to leave the phone alone. But I couldn't. I picked it up. This time, the photo was different. It was blurry at first, hard to make out. But as I focused, it became clearer. It was a photo of me, but I hadn't taken it. I wasn't even sure when it was taken. I wasn't even sure how it was possible. It was a photo of me, asleep in my bed. The angle was strange, like it had been taken from behind the door, just barely visible. I could see myself, laying there with my eyes closed, the soft rise and fall of my chest in the dim light of the room. But what was worse was what was in the background. A shadow in the corner of the room, a tall figure standing motionless, almost invisible in the dark. I couldn't see its face. It was too dark. But I knew it was there. And I knew it was watching me. I slammed the phone down again, my breath shallow. Panic began to rise in my chest. This wasn't just some random photos. This was something else. Something far worse. And I had no idea how to stop it. But one thing was certain, whoever or whatever was sending these photos wasn't done yet. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls of my apartment seemed to be closing in, the air thick with the weight of something I couldn't see but could feel all around me. The images kept coming, each one more intimate, more disturbing than the last. I thought I could stop looking, but every time I tried to ignore them, the fear grew worse. I needed answers. I thought about calling the police, but that idea was quickly discarded. They would never believe me. How could I explain that someone was sending me photos from inside my home? Photos of places I had never been, people I hadn't seen in years, and worse, photos of me when I was alone, when I didn't know anyone was watching. I thought about calling my brother. He would at least listen, but I wasn't sure he could help. The last time we talked, he seemed so distant, so wrapped up in his own life. But maybe, just maybe, he would believe me. I dialed his number, my thumb trembling as I hit the call button. The phone rang for a few moments, then he picked up. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk." "Is everything okay?" he asked, sounding half awake. I couldn't blame him, it was late, and I hadn't called him in weeks. But there was something in his voice that made me hesitate. He wasn't really listening. "I'm not sure," I said, feeling the weight of the words. "Something's happening. I think someone's spying on me." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him shifting in his bed. "Spying on you? What do you mean?" "I'm getting these photos. Photos of places I don't remember, of people I don't know. And there's one of me, in my bed, while I'm asleep." His voice became quieter. "What do you mean, photos of you?" "Like, someone's been taking pictures of me. Of my apartment, of my family, of places I haven't been in years." I heard him exhale deeply, as if unsure how to respond. "Are you sure it's not some sort of glitch, or maybe a prank?" "I've thought about that," I said, pacing around the room. "But it's too specific. The photos are too real. They're coming from my phone. They're linked to my cloud storage. I didn't take them." There was silence again, but this time it lasted longer. I felt a wave of frustration rising. I need help. I don't know what's going on, but I can't just ignore this anymore. He cleared his throat, his voice calmer now. I'll come over. Let's look at this together. We'll figure it out. I felt a small relief, but something still gnawed at me. Something told me this wasn't something we could simply figure out. There was something darker at play here, something I couldn't understand. Okay. Please, hurry. I hung up and sat down, clutching my phone in my hand. I wanted to scroll through the gallery again, but I didn't. I couldn't. The last photo, the one of me sleeping, was still fresh in my mind, its details burned into my memory. It was so real. Too real. As I waited for my brother, I tried to think of anything that might explain what was happening. Had I been hacked? Was someone using my phone to send these photos to themselves? But even if that were true, how could they have access to images of my childhood home? My aunt's house? My cousin's place? The phone buzzed. I froze. Another photo. I had promised myself I wouldn't look, but I couldn't resist. The fear, the curiosity, they were too strong. My fingers moved without thought, opening the message. The photo was of a house. Not just any house. It was my aunt's house, the one from the photo earlier. But this time, there was a detail I hadn't noticed before. The door. The door was wide open, the light from inside spilling out onto the porch. But it wasn't just the open door that made my heart race. It was the figure standing just inside the doorway. The same dark figure that had appeared in the park, in the hallway, and now, here again. This time, I could see it more clearly. It was a woman, but her features were too blurred to make out. The thing that terrified me wasn't the figure itself, but the feeling it gave me. Like it was waiting for something. Waiting for someone. My blood ran cold as I realized it was waiting for me. I tried to shake off the feeling, but the panic set in again. I couldn't breathe. I had to leave. I needed to leave the apartment. To get out, to get away from this thing, whatever it was. I grabbed my jacket and keys, but as I reached for the door, I hesitated. I needed to make sure the apartment was locked. I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. But as I checked the locks, I noticed something. The light on my phone flickered. Another message. I opened it, expecting the worst. It was a photo. But this time, it wasn't of a place. It was of a person. I didn't recognize the face at first. It was a blurry figure, standing in a dim room. The more I looked at it, the more familiar it became. It was my mother. But she was different. Her expression was hollow, like she was somewhere else. Her eyes stared straight at the camera, unblinking. Her lips were parted, as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came. And then, in the corner of the photo, I saw a small detail that made my stomach twist, the faint outline of a figure behind her. It was the same dark figure. The one that had been following me. It was standing just behind her, its form nearly invisible, but there. Watching. That was when I realized this wasn't just a game. This wasn't some random hacker or glitch. Something was happening. Something that I couldn't escape. I heard a knock at the door. It was my brother. But for a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't let him in. Not yet. I needed time to think. To understand what was really happening. But deep down, I already knew. The photos weren't just about the past. They were about the future. About something coming. Something waiting for me. And it was already here. I stood frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the photo of my mother. The figure behind her was so unsettling that it felt like I could feel its presence in the room, even though it wasn't physically there. I knew I needed to act. I couldn't let myself be consumed by this, but fear made my body heavy, and the weight of the unknown kept me rooted in place. The knock at the door came again, louder this time, and I snapped back to reality. My brother. He was here to help. I couldn't stay paralyzed. I stumbled to the door and opened it quickly, trying to shake off the image in my mind. He stood there, eyes wide with concern. "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay?" I nodded quickly, though I wasn't sure if I was lying to him or to myself. Yeah, it's just, I stopped. I didn't know how to explain. How could I? He stepped in, looking around the apartment, eyes scanning the dimly lit room. His brow furrowed. "It feels different in here. You're shaking." "Let me show you," I said, voice trembling as I held up my phone. I unlocked it, showing him the gallery. The images were still there, one after another, each one chilling in its own right. I handed him the phone, watching his face as he scrolled through them. His eyes flicked between the photos, but his expression didn't change. Not at first. "What is this?" he asked, confusion creeping into his voice. "These places, they don't make sense. Have you been here?" "No," I said, my throat tight. "I've never been there. But look," I pointed to the latest photo, the one of my mother with the figure standing behind her. "That's my mom. And that thing behind her, it's been following me. I swear it's the same thing. It's everywhere." He took a step back, looking at the photo more intently. He turned to me with a puzzled frown. "This doesn't look like a prank or a glitch. There's something about these photos, but it's hard to believe." I could see the doubt in his eyes, but at that moment, the air in the room grew heavier. The walls seemed to press in closer, and for a second, it felt like the shadows around us deepened, thickening. "Look, I know it sounds crazy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not making this up. This is real. Something's happening, and I don't know what to do." My brother glanced at the phone again and then at me. His voice softened. "Maybe you're just overthinking. Could it be someone hacking into your account? It could be a mistake, maybe." I shook my head violently. "No. It's not that simple. I've changed my passwords. I've done everything I can. These photos, they're not from me. They're not even from anyone I know." I paused, my voice dropping. "But they know me. They know us." He hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt? Fear? I glanced back at my phone. Another notification popped up, flashing on the screen. The same unease gripped my chest, but I couldn't help myself. I tapped it. This time, there was no photo. Just a message, "I see you." I swallowed hard, my stomach flipping. My brother saw the message too. His eyes widened, his mouth opening as if to say something, but he was cut off by a sharp sound from the hallway. A noise that shouldn't have been there. A soft scraping, like something dragging across the floor. We both froze. The sound was so subtle, yet it felt like it was right behind us. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my veins. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, already knowing the answer. He nodded stiffly. "What the hell was that?" I didn't know, but every instinct told me to get out of the apartment. My hands were clammy, my pulse erratic, but I couldn't make myself move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, as if I was waiting for something to happen. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to face. Another scraping sound. Closer. Closer. It was as if the thing behind the photos was manifesting itself, drawing closer and closer to us, to me. Suddenly, the door to my apartment slammed shut. Hard. The sound of the impact echoed through the small hallway. We both jumped, the suddenness of it sending my heart into overdrive. I turned toward the door, my breath catching in my throat. The dim light from the hallway seeped in through the cracks beneath the door, casting long shadows on the floor. I could hear the faintest rustling from the other side. It wasn't just a sound now. It felt like a presence. My brother stepped back, his hand instinctively going to his pocket, likely searching for his phone or some way to defend himself, but I wasn't sure it would matter. "We need to leave," I said urgently. "Right now. This isn't safe." But as I stepped toward the door, another notification popped up on my screen. I glanced at it, and my stomach dropped. A new photo. I slowly opened the image. It was of the apartment complex. But it wasn't just any view, it was from the hallway, right outside my door. The angle was perfect, as if the photographer had been standing there, watching. And there, in the corner of the frame, just like in the other photos, was the figure. It wasn't just standing anymore. It was moving toward the door. I heard the floor creak behind me. The scraping sound grew louder. "Go," I whispered, more to myself than to my brother. "Go now." But as I turned to make a break for the door, it opened. Just a crack. And from the darkness, I saw a face. It was my mother's. But her eyes were hollow. Empty. And I realized, too late, that the thing I had been running from wasn't just the photos. It was her. She was already here. The world seemed to collapse in that moment. My breath caught in my throat, and I staggered back, my heart racing so fast I could hear the pulse in my ears. The figure in the doorway, my mother, but not my mother, was a hollow version of the woman I once knew. Her eyes were dark, empty sockets, as though someone had carved out her soul. And yet, she was standing there, impossibly still, her form bathed in the dim light from the hallway. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, choked with fear. The scrape of my brother's shoes on the floor was the only sound that broke the suffocating silence. "Don't go near it," he hissed, his voice trembling. But his warning was too late. Before either of us could react, the door opened wider, as though something on the other side was pulling it, slowly, deliberately. The creaking sound echoed in the still air, the tension so thick I could almost taste it. The thing that looked like my mother stepped forward, its movements unnaturally slow, like it was savoring every moment of terror. And with each step, the air seemed to grow colder. The once familiar warmth of the room felt like it was being sucked out, replaced by an unnatural chill that made my skin crawl. I backed away instinctively, but the walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in on me. The shadows from the hallway stretched longer, twisting, contorting. My feet hit the ground harder, as if the very floor beneath me was rebelling against my movements. I glanced at my brother. He was frozen too, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. Then, the figure, the thing that had once been my mother, spoke. Her voice was a hollow whisper. "I've been waiting for you." The words reverberated in my mind, a chilling echo that made the hairs on my neck stand up. This wasn't her. This wasn't the woman who had raised me, who had comforted me through every storm in my life. This was something else. Something that had taken her place. I don't understand," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The figure cocked its head to the side, an almost curious expression crossing its face. But there was no warmth in its eyes. No love, no recognition. "What?" It repeated the word, its voice cold and distorted, like it was testing the sound of it. "I don't want anything. I simply am." And with those words, I realized the horror that had been lurking behind the photos. The thing in the images, the presence I had felt all along, was not just a trick of technology. It was something real. Something that had attached itself to my family, to me. And it was feeding off our fear. I reached for my phone, trembling, and the screen lit up once again. Another notification. Another photo. But this time, it wasn't of a place. It wasn't a location I didn't recognize. This time, it was of me. The photo was grainy, distorted, but unmistakably, it was me standing in the doorway, looking at my mother's shadowy figure. But in the image, there was something else. A dark, tall shape looming behind me, its face obscured in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same figure. The one that had been following me. The one that had been in every photo. It wasn't just my mother who had been replaced. It was everything. The places. The people. The very fabric of my reality. I stumbled backward, the phone slipping from my hand. My brother, still frozen in place, finally blinked as though snapping out of a trance. "This isn't happening," he whispered, as though saying the words aloud would make it all go away. But it wasn't going to go away. The figure took another step toward us, its shadow spilling across the room, stretching impossibly far. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. And then, just as suddenly as it had opened, the door slammed shut. The room plunged into darkness. I could still hear it, though. The sound of breathing. The soft rasp of it, like something was behind me, too close, too intimate. My body moved on its own, my legs carrying me toward the door, but the closer I got, the more I felt the cold, suffocating presence of whatever this was, whatever it had become. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could touch it, a cold hand grasped my shoulder, pulling me back. "Leave," the voice whispered again, its breath hot on my ear. "Leave before it's too late." The words made no sense. I didn't know what was happening, what I was supposed to do. And yet, I couldn't fight the compulsion to obey. I had to get out. I turned and stumbled toward the window, my mind racing. I knew the apartment was on the top floor, and the fall would likely kill me. But there was no other option. I couldn't stay in that apartment, not with the thing that had replaced my mother standing there, watching. I climbed out of the window, my fingers brushing the cold glass, and I felt the rush of the night air against my face as I crawled along the edge, trying to reach the fire escape. The darkness below was welcoming. But before I could make it out, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, each one echoing in my ears like a drumbeat of doom. And then, as I peered into the darkness below, I saw it. The figure was standing there, waiting. It had been waiting for me all along. Have you ever returned to a place you thought you knew, only to find that it has somehow changed, yet remains the same? I hadn't thought about my hometown in years. The city where I grew up, where the streets were familiar, where the scent of the air always carried memories of childhood. But when I came back, I felt displaced. Like I was standing in a version of my past that was slightly off. And it all began with one street. It was a small, narrow lane wedged between two larger avenues. I didn't remember it at first. I had walked past it many times as a child, but something about it felt wrong. The buildings seemed familiar, but the street itself didn't belong. It didn't belong in my memories. I had been back in town for a week, reconnecting with old friends, visiting my parents' grave, trying to remember what it was that had always drawn me to this place. But nothing seemed to fit. The city had grown, developed into something modern, polished, and yet the weight of nostalgia still clung to me, pulling me deeper into my past. But then, that street. I had never noticed it before. The first time I saw it, I wasn't sure if I had walked past it earlier. Maybe it had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. I turned the corner and found myself on this street, the air suddenly feeling colder, denser. The houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows dark, their yards unkempt. It was as if the world around me had paused when I stepped into that narrow lane. I walked down it slowly, my footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. The street was eerily quiet. No cars passed, no birds sang in the trees. The wind was still. That was when I saw the house. At the far end of the street, just before the lane ended in a cul-de-sac, stood a tall, old house. It was worn, with chipped paint and ivy creeping up the sides, but there was something about it, something that made my chest tighten, like I had been here before. I didn't recognize it, and yet I knew it. I couldn't explain why, but I felt an odd pull toward it. I paused at the end of the street, looking up at the house. The windows were dark, but I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement behind the curtains. My heartbeat quickened, my breath shallow. I felt the same unease I used to feel as a child when I stood in the dark, waiting for something to happen. I had to know more. I needed to understand why this street, this house, felt so familiar. I turned and began walking toward it. As I neared the house, I felt a strange sense of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. But when I reached the porch, there was no one there. No one visible in the windows. I hesitated. The steps leading up to the door felt as if they were pulling me closer, urging me to enter. Something made me knock. I didn't know why. Maybe I was just looking for a connection to my past, something to explain the emptiness I had felt since returning. But when the door opened, it wasn't what I expected. An elderly couple stood there. They were old, yes, but their eyes were sharp, full of life, despite their age. The woman smiled at me, her expression warm, almost welcoming. But there was something unsettling about her smile. It was too knowing, like she could see something in me that I couldn't see myself. "Hello," she said in a soft, raspy voice. "Can I help you?" I nodded, my voice faltering. I was just walking by, and I thought I'd ask about the house. I don't remember it being here before." The man beside her looked at me closely, his gaze unnervingly intense. "Ah, the old street. It has a way of showing itself to those who are meant to find it," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Meant to find it? I repeated, my heart skipping a beat. Something in his words sent a chill through me. The woman stepped aside, gesturing toward the interior of the house. Come in, dear. You must be tired from your journey. We've been waiting for you. My body tensed. I wanted to run, but something deep inside me held me back. This place, these people, felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was looking for. I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. The house was dimly lit, the furniture old but meticulously arranged. The smell of dust and aged wood filled the air. It was the smell of a time long past. Come, sit, the woman urged, guiding me into the living room. We have much to talk about. I felt an odd sense of inevitability, as if I had walked into a story that had been unfolding for much longer than I had realized. The old couple took seats across from me, and for a moment, we all sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. And then, the woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't remember, do you? She asked, her eyes searching mine as if trying to unlock something hidden deep within me. Remember what? I replied, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. She smiled again, her lips curling in that same unsettling way. The street. The house. Your childhood. The room seemed to close in around me. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Your memories are here, the man said softly, almost reverently. You've been looking for them, and now you've found them. But be careful. Not all memories are meant to be remembered. I didn't know what they meant. But as I sat there, I began to realize something. This place, this street, this house, it wasn't just a part of my past. It was something more. Something that I had forgotten, or maybe something I had been trying to forget. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. A whisper. Come closer. It was faint, barely audible, but it made my heart race. It was as if the house itself was calling to me. I looked around the room, but the couple was still smiling at me, their eyes locked onto mine. I was trapped, and I didn't know if I could leave. The whispering continued, a soft, persistent murmur that seemed to echo through the walls. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't find the words. My heart pounded in my chest, as though I were on the verge of uncovering something I wasn't meant to know. The couple hadn't moved. They sat there, watching me, their expressions unchanged, but the air between us thickened. It felt wrong, too still, too quiet. The sound of my breathing was the only thing that filled the space. You're not going to ask about the drawings? The woman asked suddenly, her voice as calm as ever, though there was a new intensity behind it. She gestured to the wall beside us. I turned my head slowly, feeling an unnatural weight in my limbs. The wall was covered in pictures, sketches, drawings. They were familiar. Too familiar. I didn't recognize them at first, but there were faces there. Faces of people I had known. People I had forgotten. Faces from my childhood, from my family. And then there were scenes, places I had never visited, landscapes I had never seen. But something about them made my stomach churn. They seemed so real, yet so impossible. The woman smiled again, a knowing, almost pitying smile. You see, memories have a way of staying with us. They don't always fade. They just wait to be remembered. and when they're ready, they bring us back. I wanted to look away, but something held my gaze. Each drawing felt like a piece of a puzzle that belonged to someone else. My hand instinctively reached toward the one in the center, a drawing of a house identical to the one we were sitting in. Only this one was different. In the drawing, the windows were wide open, the curtains billowing as though caught in an unseen wind. And there, just beneath the open window, was a shadow. A figure. My hand trembled as I touched the surface of the drawing. The paper felt cold and smooth under my fingertips, but the longer I looked at it, the more the figure in the window seemed to shift. The shadow moved, just for a moment, as though alive. "Do you remember her?" The man's voice broke through my thoughts. I blinked, pulling my hand back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the drawing. It was as if the figure in the window had become a part of me. It was something I had forgotten, something I had buried. "Her name is Emily," the woman added softly. "She used to play with you when you were a child. She was your closest friend." I shook my head. I don't remember her." The woman's eyes softened, her expression filled with pity. "You don't remember because you chose not to. But we remember for you, because sometimes it's too painful to remember on your own." "Who are you?" I finally found my voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. The man smiled, his eyes never leaving mine. "We are the keepers of memories. We guard what you forget, what you try to forget. You've always known this street, always known this house. You just needed to return to it." I stood up suddenly, my legs unsteady beneath me. "No, this is all wrong. I don't want to be here. I don't want any part of this." But the woman's voice, calm and soothing, stopped me before I could take a step. "You can't leave, dear. Not yet. Not until you remember." I turned to face the door, my mind racing. I needed to leave. I had to get out of this house, away from this place. But as I reached for the door, the whispering returned, stronger this time, louder. The voice seemed to come from the walls, from the floor beneath me. It was everywhere. "Come closer," it urged again, coaxing, as though beckoning me toward the heart of the house. I hesitated, my hand still on the doorknob. The whispers pulled at me, felt like fingers brushing against my skin, urging me to step forward. And then I heard it, the soft shuffle of footsteps behind me. I spun around quickly, but the couple was still sitting in the same spot, unmoving. The sound wasn't theirs. It came from deeper in the house, somewhere far beyond the living room, where the shadows pulled thick and dark. The woman's voice cut through the growing tension. "Don't be afraid. It's just Emily." "Emily?" My throat tightened. "What do you mean? What's happening here?" The man's gaze remained locked on me, unblinking. "She's been waiting for you. She's always waiting. The street remembers you, just as it remembers her." I took a step back. My body felt cold, numb. "I don't understand. I don't know what you want from me." "Not from you, dear," the woman whispered. "For you." The room seemed to darken around me. The shadows in the corners stretched longer, creeping toward me, pulling at my feet. I could feel the walls closing in, could hear the soft rustling of something in the dark, just beyond my reach. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the hallway, bathed in the dim light of the hallway lamp. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil of shadows, but I could see her clearly enough. She was looking directly at me. Emily? I whispered, my voice trembling. She stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate, and her face was twisted, unrecognizable. It wasn't the face of a child, but a much older one. A stranger's face, unfamiliar and yet deeply unsettling. You've forgotten, the figure spoke, her voice hollow, distant. But I haven't forgotten you. I froze. My heart stopped. And the room, the house, the very air around me, everything seemed to fall into a heavy silence. Only the sound of my breathing remained, ragged and shallow. I had been looking for something, but now that I had found it, I wasn't sure I wanted it. And the more I looked at Emily, the more I felt that I had uncovered something I was never meant to know. Come, she beckoned, her arm outstretched toward me. I stood there, rooted to the spot. Something in me wanted to go to her, but my legs refused to move. I didn't know what she wanted, but I felt the dark weight of something ancient and forgotten pressing down on me. Remember, she whispered. And then, everything went black. I woke up with a start, gasping for air as though I had been submerged in water. My heart raced in my chest, each beat thudding painfully in my ears. The room around me was dark, too dark, and I could still hear the faint whispering in the distance. It was muffled now, like the sound of wind rustling through trees. Or was it something else? I blinked rapidly, trying to focus. Where was I? The walls of the house were gone, replaced by the soft, familiar hum of my apartment. I was in my own bed, back in the life I knew. The nightmare, or whatever it had been, felt distant, but it left a lingering weight in my chest, a gnawing sense that something had been lost. But then I saw it. On the nightstand beside me, my phone sat, its screen lit up with a notification. I reached for it slowly, the movement mechanical, as though I were moving underwater. The screen flashed briefly, then settled. It was a new photo. I frowned, lifting the phone to get a better look. My finger hovered over the screen, not sure if I wanted to unlock it. The last thing I needed was another strange image, another reminder of the horrors from the house, from the woman in the hallway. But the curiosity won. I unlocked the phone and opened the gallery. The photo that appeared on the screen took my breath away. It was a picture of the hallway. The same hallway from the house. The same dim light, the same shadows, and standing at the end of it, the same figure. Emily. She was standing there, exactly as I had seen her in the dream, or was it a memory? Her face was still obscured in shadow, but I could see the outline of her body, the figure clearly captured in the photo. The room had the same oppressive weight, the same chilling silence. I blinked, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining it. That it was some glitch, some technical malfunction. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. This wasn't a mistake. I scrolled down to the next image. Another picture of the hallway, but this time, the door at the end was slightly ajar, as though something had been inside. The shadows seemed deeper here, darker. And once again, Emily's figure appeared. But this time, she was closer. I dropped the phone, the device slipping from my hands as though it were too hot to touch. It landed on the bed with a soft thud, but I couldn't look away from the images still seared into my mind. How could this be happening? I had left the house. I had left that street. The couple, the drawings, they had all seemed so real, so grounded in a reality I couldn't escape. But now, back in my apartment, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The pictures on my phone had been taken with my own camera. I hadn't taken them. I hadn't been there. I hadn't seen Emily, or had I? The phone vibrated again, snapping me out of my thoughts. A new notification flashed across the screen, a single line of text. Come home. The street is waiting. I felt the blood drain from my face. My pulse quickened again, pounding in my ears. I opened my mouth to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know if I could run from this. The street. The house. Emily. Suddenly, the silence in the room grew unbearable, and the whispering began again. It wasn't coming from the phone anymore, though. It seemed to fill the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The walls pressed in on me, as if the apartment itself was closing its grip around me. I shot up from the bed, grabbing the phone again, but the screen had gone black. I tried to turn it on, but it refused to respond. No lights, no text. Just a cold, empty screen. I stood there in the dark, frozen, my hands still clutching the phone, my mind racing. It felt as though the room was shrinking around me, the air thick with an unexplainable pressure. Every instinct told me to run, to get out, to escape, but where could I go? And then I heard it. A soft knock at the door. It was light, almost tentative, as though someone was waiting, unsure whether I would answer. But I knew better than to open it. My heart skipped a beat. The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the wall, my breath shallow. I couldn't move, couldn't think straight. I was caught in the grip of something I didn't understand. The knocking stopped. A silence followed, thick and heavy. And then, a voice. A soft, familiar voice, but distorted, as though coming from behind a wall. Come on. You know you can't stay away forever. I recognized it instantly. It was Emily. I felt the floor tremble beneath my feet, and then the light in the room flickered. The shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally, as if something was moving just beyond my sight. The door handle turned. I stood there, rooted in place, terror flooding my senses. The door creaked open a fraction, just enough to see the dark void beyond it. And then, through the crack, I saw her. Emily was standing there in the hallway of my apartment. But this wasn't a dream. This wasn't the street. She was here, in my world, her face finally visible, though it was no longer the child's face I remembered. It was older than I could ever have imagined. The eyes staring back at me were hollow, dark, and full of things I wasn't ready to know. I've been waiting, she whispered, her voice low, sad. You're home now. And then the darkness enveloped me. I woke with a start, my heart hammering in my chest, the air thick with the same suffocating weight I had felt in that dark moment. But this time, I wasn't in my apartment. I wasn't even in my bed. I was on the street again. The old street. The feeling of cold pavement against my skin jolted me to my senses. My breath came out in ragged gasps, and I scrambled to push myself upright. My body ached, as though I had been lying on the cold ground for hours, but I couldn't remember how I had gotten here. I looked around, disoriented. The houses loomed around me, just as they had when I first arrived. The same dark windows, the same peeling paint on the doors. The same oppressive silence. But this time, something was different. There was no sign of the couple, the old man and woman I had met. The air was still, almost unnaturally so. Not even the wind dared to move. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. Emily. She stood across the street, watching me with those hollow eyes. Her expression was unreadable, but the way she stood, motionless, made it clear that she was waiting for something. Or someone. My feet were frozen to the ground, my body unwilling to move, as though the very street beneath me was holding me captive. I tried to speak, to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. A low hum began to fill the air, a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't mechanical, nor was it natural. It was like the very atmosphere was vibrating, growing louder and louder until it seemed to shake the ground beneath me. Emily didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me. I had to get away. I had to leave, but my legs wouldn't obey. The pull of the street, the weight of it, kept me rooted in place, trapped in this nightmare I couldn't escape. The hum intensified, becoming a sharp, screeching noise. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was in my head, vibrating through my skull. My vision blurred, the edges of the world warping as the noise crescendoed, threatening to tear me apart. And then, through the chaos, I heard a voice. It wasn't Emily's. It was softer, older, but it felt familiar. It felt like a memory, one I had pushed away for far too long. Come home. The words echoed in my mind, distant yet clear. I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to understand, but the pull was too strong. It was like the street had its own will, its own desire for me to return. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the noise, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. But when I opened them again, Emily was standing closer, much closer, her face now inches from mine. Her eyes were no longer hollow. They were full of something else, something dark and ancient. Her mouth twisted into a smile that sent ice through my veins. "It's time," she whispered. The ground beneath me shook violently, and I stumbled, falling to my knees. The street seemed to breathe, its pulse matching the frantic beat of my heart. The walls of the houses pressed in on me, warping and bending like they were alive, like they were closing in, trapping me in this strange, twisted version of my own world. I had to move. I had to get out. But where? There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere left to hide. I turned to look behind me, hoping for some sign of escape, but the street stretched on endlessly, the houses now blending together, forming an unbroken line of shadow and decay. Emily's voice cut through the air again, sharp and clear, like a blade. "You can't leave. You never will." I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but the street was empty. The silence was deafening now, and the only sound I could hear was the thundering of my own pulse. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. This had to be a dream, a hallucination, something my mind had conjured up in its desperation to make sense of everything that had happened. But then I felt it. A cold hand, pale and bony, rested on my shoulder. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The touch was ice, sending a shiver down my spine. Slowly, I turned around, knowing full well what I would see. The woman stood there, just behind me now. The same woman I had seen in my dreams, in the photos. The one whose face was hidden in shadows, but whose presence was as clear as the suffocating dark. She smiled at me, her teeth sharp and gleaming. "You've come home, my dear." The world around me cracked, the street splitting open like a wound. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I stumbled back, but there was no place to go. There was nowhere to escape. The woman took a step forward, and I felt the air grow colder still. Her voice echoed in my ears, soft and insistent. It's time to remember. The world blurred, the street and the woman dissolving into darkness. But through the blackness, one thought remained clear in my mind. I had always been here. And then everything went silent. I awoke with a sharp gasp, a painful lurch in my chest, as if I had been holding my breath for too long. For a moment, I couldn't place where I was. The air was thick with the scent of dust and mildew, and the world around me seemed muted, far too quiet. My fingers brushed against a cold surface, stone, perhaps, and I immediately jerked back in shock. I was lying on the floor. No longer on the street, but in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old, yellowed wallpaper, peeling at the edges, the faint smell of mildew hanging heavy in the air. My heart raced as my mind tried to piece together what had happened. Where was I? How did I get here? I pushed myself up, my head spinning. My hands trembled as I tried to steady myself against the cold, rough wall. The dim light flickered, casting strange shadows that stretched and recoiled as though the room itself was alive. I stumbled to my feet, looking around. The room was small, no bigger than a closet, but there was a door at the far end, partially ajar. I took a step toward it, but a chill ran down my spine. I wasn't alone. I turned quickly, and there, standing just beyond the shadows of the room, was the couple, the old man and woman. Their eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as though they had been waiting for me. The woman smiled faintly, her eyes deep and knowing. The man, his features obscured by the shadows, just stood there, motionless. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, the words caught in my chest. What did they want from me? Why was I here? The woman spoke first, her voice soft, but it filled the room, making the air feel thick and heavy. "You've come back," she whispered. Her words echoed in the stillness, reverberating through my mind, but I couldn't understand what she meant. Come back? I didn't even know where I was. "Do you remember?" she asked, her voice laced with something unsettling, something both comforting and terrifying. I shook my head. No, I didn't remember. I didn't know who they were, or why I felt like I had been here before. The memory was slipping through my fingers like water, just beyond my reach. The man stepped forward, his gaze piercing through the dim light. His voice, low and raspy, filled the room like a distant rumble of thunder. "You were always meant to return." The words sent a shiver through me, but I couldn't pull away. It was like an invisible thread tied to my chest, drawing me deeper into the room, into their presence. My feet moved on their own, a force greater than my will guiding me closer. "You've forgotten, but we haven't," the woman continued, her eyes full of sorrow. "This place has always been yours. And it will always be." I stopped in my tracks. I wanted to back away, but the door, my only possible escape, was just a few feet away. It felt miles away, though, as though something was keeping me from it. Keeping me in this place, in this room, in this twisted, familiar nightmare. "No," I whispered, shaking my head violently. "This isn't right. I don't belong here. I need to leave." But the woman's expression didn't change. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "You can't leave. You've never left. This place, this street, it's part of you. It always has been." The world around me blurred, the walls seeming to close in. The room started to feel smaller, the shadows stretching like claws reaching for me. I could hear the sound of my own breath, ragged and panicked, but beneath that, there was something else. A low, vibrating hum that filled the space, growing louder, insistent. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but it was inside my mind, pressing in on me. The air was growing thicker, heavier. And then, through the hum, I heard it again. Come home. The words crashed over me, and I gasped, my chest tightening. I recognized them. I had heard them before, those same words, in the street, in the dark, in the photos. I turned to the door, desperation clawing at me. I had to leave. I had to escape. But when I tried to move toward it, something stopped me. A presence. A force. The air shimmered around me, the very fabric of the room twisting, and the door, no longer a way out, became a barrier. You can't leave, the man said again, his voice like gravel. Not yet. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my bones. My heart raced, and my hands shook violently as I tried to push against the walls to tear myself free from this suffocating grip. You've always been here, the woman said, her voice like a lullaby, both soothing and terrifying. And now you'll never leave. The room spun faster now, the walls warping, the air growing colder, colder until it felt like my very soul was freezing. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision narrowed, the edges of the room fading into blackness. And then everything stopped. The hum, the pressure, the cold. The room was gone. The street, the old street, was all that remained. And in the distance, I saw her. Emily. Her hollow eyes stared at me from the end of the road. I didn't move. I couldn't move. The weight of everything, the street, the memories, the couple, Emily, pressed in on me. I was trapped. Forever. I had never left. And I never would. The street had claimed me. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.